stay with telecom, and at a time when the opposition has been training its guns on Telecom Minister A. Raja, DMK Chief Karunanidhi met with the Prime Minister as well as Sonia Gandhi in the capital today.
Meanwhile, sources have told NDTV that the DMK has made its stand clear that with no concrete evidence against the telecom minister, he will not be touched, a decision that has also been backed by the Congress.
Well, we have a special discussion now on this tangle and also the implications on the telecom space.
That's right. Joining us now, of course, is Romal Shetty, the Executive Director, in fact, the Head of Telecom of KPMG, and, of course, Telecom Consultant Mahesh Uppal, both with us here on the show. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. Let me start by asking Mr. Shetty, given the fact that the numbers that we are seeing in the 3G auction, government revenues already crossing 40,000 crores, it's now seeming to be a no-brainer that the 2G licenses were sold at throwaway prices.
Yeah, see, I think 1,650 crores obviously was something which was of a very, I think there was no proper determinant of how did you actually arrive at a price like that, which meant, and that too after so many years. So it's very clear. I mean, whenever you trade spectrum, or whenever you auction spectrum, it always makes sense to do it from an auction route. Yes, auctions do push prices higher because you go more than probably normally what you would expect to sort of pay out. But that's the most fair and transparent manner in sort of doing things. So yes, it's a no-brainer in terms of 1,650 crores being not adequate at all.
All right, having said that, Mahesh Uppal, let me bring you into this discussion. We have a lot of our viewers writing into us and saying that, the government can't have double standards. On the one hand, you had a case where Shashi Tharoor was asked to step down. You should also have the telecom minister being shown the door. But I'm not going to ask you whether you think that's the right way forward. But should there be a symbolic step now which sort of, at least sets this into the right as opposed to being in the wrong as it is?
Well, I think it's not a question that I would have preferred to answer. But yes, there is no doubt that Mr. Raja has presided over a series of decisions which, by all accounts, and certainly after the 3G auctions have come to this stage, were prima facie not objective. It is very clear that the price that was charged for India is in fact lower than the price we now have currently for just Delhi alone. So clearly Mr. Raja is guilty of having not bothered to find out what the price of that spectrum was. And I think, as I've mentioned elsewhere, I think Mr. Raja's job was not to take refuge in that this is how we did it before, but to recognize that there was a problem and fix it. So I don't think even his defense that this was how we gave away spectrum in the past and this is how I've done it and this is policy is good enough defense.
All right, but staying with the very important point that you've raised here, that of...
Different issue.
Right. Staying with the point of the government's policy on this, while everyone's really training their guns on the telecom minister, on A. Raja, even the government's overall policy doesn't seem to be very clear on what the government really wanted to do at that time. Even the TRAI, a lot of flip-flops on part of the TRAI. Romal Shetty, if I could get your comments on this.
I think, see, there obviously have been from the TRA, I think there have been many recommendations which have gone back and forth. And TRA is just a recommendatory, body. It is not a mandating authority. It ultimately has to go to the Department of Telecom and then the Telecom Minister. So I suppose probably saying from a TRA perspective, I would not necessarily agree that. But I think because they can only recommend certain things, and if the government doesn't accept it, or the DOT and Telecom Ministry doesn't accept it, so be it. But I think the important point is, like Mahesh said, I think the important point is now to move on to say what needs to be done. So whether it is now the future spectrum policy, not just looking at the past, but we should have a clear future spectrum policy, how we will allocate. So it's not only the question of having 1,650 crores people bidding for that and then not even having spectrum to launch circles. So I think those are the things which need to be corrected. What's happened has happened. Probably there's nothing much anybody can do about it. But at least, you need to correct some of that and have a long-term vision for, how this industry is going to go ahead.
Romal Shetty, staying with you, and in keeping with that same sort of thought about, what happens from here on going forward, The point you make is an interesting one, of course, in terms of, just the sanctity of the process from here on. But from the point of view of the consumer, I mean, should the government be keeping cognizance of the fact that, all right, given what's happened, a lot of the players argue that this has allowed the tariffs to come down. It's allowed, a lot more people to sort of come on board. Is that a logical argument? Is that something the government should even be keeping track of going forward?
See, I think why, for example, prices have come down primarily is because of competition, right? It is because of, severe competition with some of the largest players in the world trying to come into India, trying to compete. So it's not just, I mean, yes, of course, a license fee is a significant element, but that's not the only element. The element really which has brought it down is competition and volume in India. So I don't think that's the right thing of saying probably, because you paid a lower license fee, hence you should charge a lower tariff. Yes, to some extent, yes, but I would say India has been dominated by the market and market forces. So if the market forces are such that which have actually ensured that all operators bring down the price. I mean, people were charging 16 rupees, right, per call some time back when they got the license fees. Did anybody come onto the network? Did they have huge volumes? No. They could have continued charging 16 bucks and said that, listen, we won't bring down because we paid, so much of license fees. But that doesn't work. So I don't think that the argument is completely logical.
All right, let me in fact just get a perspective from Mahesh Uppal at this point in time, given the kind of numbers that are coming in with regard to 3G and putting the 2G numbers and the 3G numbers in perspective right now. Obviously, when you're looking at the kind of revenues that the government is making, 40,000 crores, the kind of numbers that people are really bidding, we can expect that, yes, the days of free lunches for consumers are over, especially as far as the value-added services are concerned. The 3G services won't come cheap at all. Is that right, Mahesh Uppal?
Well, to a point, I don't believe that this is necessarily all correct for two reasons. One is that in the near future, most of 3G services will be used for voice. And there is no way that operators can demand a premium on a product like voice, which looks like what 2G voice is. I mean, there's a very marginal difference between 2G voice quality and 3G voice quality. So if the 3G spectrum is, at least to begin with, used only for voice, then it will be very difficult for any operator to charge a very high premium for 3G voice. I believe that it will have to be competitive with 2G itself. As far as data services are concerned, value-added services are concerned, again, operators would try and see how much they can extract from the market, but they know as much as you do that eventually, unless they have volumes, the market is not going to take off. And one advantage that they have is that once you put the infrastructure up, then the cost, the incremental cost that the operators have is virtually zero. So I don't think if we will see very high prices, because I think operators will very soon discover that there is very little stomach for very high prices, and if they don't want their infrastructure to go down the drain, and if they don't want to have all their infrastructure unused, then they will have to offer a price that the customer is able to pay. So my feeling is that irrespective of what the operators pay for the spectrum, and irrespective of how much they would want to recover their costs from consumer tariffs, there is only a point to which this can work. The customer tariffs can just not be exorbitant, because it will be counterproductive for the operators themselves. Right. So I think we should be careful about speculating that we are going to have some exorbitantly priced 3G services. It will work. It will help no one at all, neither consumers nor operators.
Right, and we can also assume in a sense that once those subscriber numbers go up, perhaps that will drive some of these tariffs down. But let's try and sort of wrap this up, gentlemen, and I would like to get a sense from both of you, very briefly, just the way forward. I think we had, of course, Romal mentioning it just a short while ago, but something like what happened with the 2G licensing, you do have a telecom regulator, you do have the opposition making noise now, which is much after the event. How do you prevent something like this happening in the future? So should there be some regulatory process?
So I think, obviously there should, the regulatory process is, I think there is a regulatory process, but I think there should be a proper transparency in the whole way this is decided. right? So I think that's something which needs to be made very, very clear of. If tomorrow, I mean, there is going to be one more auction which will happen in the future. There will be more 3G or 4G licenses, doled out. So there has to be a clear process laid out, clearly transparent, and everybody should understand how this exactly works. I think that's something which will put an end to any of the speculation about wrongdoings and other things.
Right, Mahesh Uppal, do you agree with that?
Well, to a large extent, yes. And I think one of the positives of this auction is that whether Mr. Raja or his successors like it or not, whether the regulators like it or not, at least once the price of spectrum, at least the orders of magnitude of what the price of spectrum is, has now been established. And I think it's going to be virtually impossible for anybody to now argue in future that spectrum should be allocated or priced on an administrative basis. Everyone knows that the price that we have charged when we let bureaucrats do it was a ridiculously low price. And there was an excuse they had that at the time these prices were set, the knowledge about this business was much less. People didn't know how far the sector would go. But be that as it may, right now we know that the price of spectrum and the willingness of people to pay for it suggests that this price is several times more than what Mr. Raja charged. And there is no justification whatsoever for giving the spectrum away in future at a price other than that the market determines.
Well, there's too much at stake, clearly.
That is the positive from this.
Right, and there is too much at stake, so we'll have to wait and see, of course, where things go from here. But